Welcome to the All-In Community webinar, Advocacy Made Easy. My name is Reba Collins, and I am your host. Today, we welcome our two presenters, Wendy Farr from the Vincentian Ohio Action Network and the Healing Communities Trainer for the West Ohio Conference, and Amanda Hoyt, Ohio State Issue 1 Campaign Manager for the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. This webinar is going to give a brief overview of faith-based advocacy work, and then we'll go into detail about two criminal justice reform initiatives in Ohio that could have great impact on our communities and our all-in community populations. So Wendy, if you would please start us off.
Yes, thank you, Reba. So this webinar is about Faith Rooted Advocacy. It's following Jesus who transforms the world. And the purpose of us meeting today and to learn about some of the things that are going on in our state is also to encourage, our education around policies and conversations related to changes in the criminal justice system that we have the opportunity to take part in as constituents, as folks who live in Ohio and have a voice in our process and our democracy. But I wanted to start out the presentation just by giving a little bit of groundwork around why advocacy matters. And, a lot of our work is about engaging people directly and building relationships with people and helping them in their practical needs in prison and coming out of prison. So why would we also want to look at advocating from a faith-based perspective? So the first thing I just wanted to say is just that there's different ways of showing our love and compassion and solidarity with those in the margins and those in need. And one of those ways, you guys have probably heard the phrase about teaching a person to fish or giving a person to fish, which is a charitable act. It's helping a person meet those immediate needs for, food, clothing, shelter, or teaching them skills to help them gain tools to do that for themselves. But what we know in our community is that access to the pond, access to being able to even use the things that you may know in order to be self-sufficient is not always there for everybody at the same way. And part of that has to do with how our systems and structures and our communities are set up that provide privilege to some and less privilege or access to others. And so this is what moves us into looking at those policies and structures in order to include that into our response for showing love to our neighbor. There's multiple, I sort of broke this up into three different categories of how we can show love and care to our friends and neighbors. One of those is direct service. So you see that on the left column, a way of meeting needs for people who may have food or need education or healthcare or jobs. You can provide direct services. Community development is one step further in creating a system to help a person meet those needs. But we also have the opportunity to look at the broader system. So, for example, a person may need a house, so you can provide a temporary shelter. You could be involved in creating housing like Habitat for Humanity, where you help a person get access to their own home. But that's one by one. And we know that our challenges with housing are much bigger than just meeting individual needs. While we need to meet individual needs, we have a larger problem in our city and our state about affordable housing, and the need is great. So it really requires looking at, affordable housing policies or just wider systems. And so, so that's one of the things that we're looking at here. And that kind of moves us into organizing. Organizing is in order to make change at a system level, it requires a large group of people being involved. Our democracy doesn't work unless people participate. And in order to address needs and problems, we have to understand what those problems and issues are, which we're going to be exploring today in this webinar. We have to learn how to build power, which is the ability to take action. If one person goes and try to talk about a big system issue, it will not be as effective as if 100 people went, or 1,000 or 100,000 people went. And so we have to build power with a purpose based on our values and our principles, about God's dream for our community, and be a part of partnering with the Spirit around what it is that that moves the heart of God, and how we can work to try to discern that, to take action together to make change. So I included a couple pieces of scripture in this webinar. I'm not necessarily going to read it all, but Psalm 72 I think is one thing to highlight in the scriptures that talks about the divine purpose of government. And it can be easy to be cynical about our government. I understand how people feel that way, but we also understand that God calls people in leadership to a certain type of leadership. And there's scripture that talks about government leaders, and this is one of those. It talks about the king, it was a monarchy. It talks about the king judging people with righteousness and the poor with justice, and defending the needy. This is part of a call and a vocation for our elected officials, for people who have authority and power at this level. So we have an opportunity if we advocate, if we speak to officials, if we are involved in taking part of our voting rights, that we should be looking for people who have these types of characteristics. I'm looking to make the lives of people on the margin, make sure that their needs are being met, and that there is a role that the leader plays in prioritizing those needs. The next thing is, there's a lot of different ways that we can go about making change. And Jesus says to be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. So we talk about that in Faith Rooted Organizing. This is a story in Luke 18 about the persistent widow, who's going to bring, she was wronged in the courts. It's not being.
Thank you so much.
And so she goes to this judge who they say has no regard, no fear of God, no regard of man, a person with a hard heart in a position of power. I think I was muted. Okay. The persistent widow continues to approach him and to call out for justice. And so there's this part, scripture teaches us that there's a role in going to a person even when they are somebody who doesn't seem to be compassionate about the needs of the poor. And eventually she wears him down with her coming, her persistence. And so that is one thing that we can think about in the work that we have, when sometimes we may not have a person that we're talking to who seems to have any compassion for the needs of people that are being treated with injustice. And it's just something I wanted to raise, because it can feel very discouraging, but we know that we have David and Goliath. We have these stories in scripture that were important for us to consider as believers. Faith-rooted tools for organizing. So in addition to that, assistance and talking about our needs and our interests, this is a sort of a little grid that I put together that talks about servant power, the worldly tools and skills that we have to engage in democracy and advocacy that are listed on the left, that we may be very familiar with. And then I'm sort of holding that up next to other types of power that we have, which is what I'm referring to as dove power, the Spirit moving in the hearts of people. It doesn't take a lot of money or a lot of numbers to reach somebody's heart with the truth, and for somebody to perhaps have some kind of awakening. And so we know that the Spirit is always moving and working and calling people into something new. And so the inner life of our leaders and the opportunity to chaplain and to pray and to call them to their better angels, if you will, to address lies that they're believing and the truth of God's word, the truth of of our interconnectedness and our need to love, like the path that offers for each one of us, is also part of what we can attend to, and that we can utilize as power, if you will, as an influence that we can bring. And it's not just us bringing it. It's really not us bringing it. It's us being a vessel for the God to move and to be sensitive to the Spirit of God and what might be happening in a particular moment where something is shifting in a spiritual sense. And I think that we have to really remember that we do that in our ministry and in our pastoral ministry with leaders. Sometimes we have leaders in our community, and so it's about pastoring and chaplaining and caring for our leaders in that way. So as we're invited into this type of work and we consider how to do advocacy, how to engage in our wider community conversations and how to make change, those are just some things that I wanted to put in front of people to think about. We may do some webinars down the future that offer more insight on those things, but now I want to shift into talking a little bit about criminal justice reform in Ohio and what's been happening in our state related to criminal justice reform. And just to kind of tee up our conversation for today, because we're going to be discussing two particular things that are pending in our state, changes and changes that we can make that our legislature is considering or the voters are considering through a ballot initiative. And I think one thing that I've noticed as I've watched how the legislature has handled different criminal justice reform bills, there seems to be a much more sense of passion or openness to making change when it comes to persons who are incarcerated for nonviolent crime, drug possession, or drug use. And so when we look at our overcrowding and we look at the huge mass incarceration that we have in Ohio, see that there seems to be progress to making sentencing changes or other types of changes for nonviolent offenders. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's really positive. But when it comes to violent offenders, the fear and the openness to rehabilitation and restoration of people who've committed violent crime seems to not be there. And there continues to be a sense that we should continue to lock people up for more and more time and widen the level of penalties for violent crime. People are, very fearful of that, and we have a barrage of stories in our news cycle, I think, paints a picture of people in our prison system, which is not always, it's not the full picture of what we're dealing with. Count individual lives and opportunities for change, and it's just something that you pass a policy that makes a massive change, and it be leaning far more towards retribution and punishment, and it's something that I find concerning and opportunity for the church to engage, because our ministry, we see a lot of transformation and we want to be able to have hope. not just, personal hope and spiritual hope, but hope for people to be able to come back to the community and try to reconstitute their lives in ways that provide real opportunities for them to move forward. So one of the things that, just to explain this in a practical example, this summer there was a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 66, that my members of our organization were active in advocating for. And I wanted to share it with this community in this webinar because it has implications for people that you may be in relationship with who have incarcerated or who are returned citizens in the community who could benefit from the changes that came with this bill. And it was Senate Bill 66 significantly expands judicial discretion to seal past criminal records. I've been dealing with a lot nonviolent crimes, but it allows for nonviolent misdemeanors and up to 5 nonviolent felonies to be eligible for record sealing, whereas in the past it was only 2 misdemeanors, 1 felony conviction. And so it greatly widens the pool of people who could be eligible to see about their record being sealed, which creates much more opportunities for them when they come back to the community to obtain jobs or housing or other things that are necessary for their reintegration and reentry. Senate Bill 66 also removes the 1-year minimum prison sentence for a technical violation of probation when a person was had only just a lower level felony of level 4 or 5 felony. So say they miss a meeting or they violate something in their probation. They're not committing a new crime, but they do something that their probation officer could send them back to prison to finish their sentence. This would reduce how long they could go back. And so it helps to reduce the heavy hand of the prison system over certain people. Then it also expands the availability of treatment in lieu of conviction and pretrial diversion. So meaning like a person who is given who had an addiction problem could be given a treatment in lieu of conviction more than 1 time. And that's new under Senate Bill 66 as an effort to try to get more people access to treatment resources. And so I wanted to share that. I think it's really positive. And then Amanda Hoyt is also on the line, and she's going to share a little bit about a ballot initiative that is also kind of working with a similar set of population of people in Ohio and changes that are being proposed through a ballot initiative.
Go ahead for me. Okay. I didn't know if you wanted to leave questions for Wendy, but okay.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, folks, I think that we have allowed time for questions about issue 1. So I will go through the basics of it and then allow you to ask me questions about some of the things you might be hearing about it right now, or hopefully I'll be able to address all the concerns or share some insights. So a group of entities, nonprofits, 4 separate nonprofits got together about 3 years ago and started looking at how to do this, how to change. Their goal was, how do we safely reduce the prison population, and how do we make move resources into substance abuse treatment because of since our state is inundated with the opioid issue and addiction problems throughout our state. So we had a lot of law enforcement, folks like that, judicial, et cetera, help us write this. It took a year of writing, and then we got it in front of the Attorney General, Mike DeWine, in December, and he approved our language and approved our summary, and then we had to collect signatures through, it's like Reverend Sandy has a call. So
Hello.
yeah, if you guys don't know that, you just got to touch that little mute button down there on the left-hand corner of your screen. So anyway, okay, so the premise of this, there's 4 basic principles to issue one. First and foremost, well, actually, I'm not going to go in this order. Actually, I'll try to go in this order because this isn't my order. Someone put this together for me. One is people who are currently incarcerated. We want them to, if they have classes or treatment that they could do, we would like for them to have the ability to earn some time off of their sentence if they actually do that accredited coursework. That coursework has to be approved by the Department of Corrections, and the person has to be approved to take it. So if they do this work, then they can get up to 25% of the time. Right now, we allow in the state of Ohio 8% to be earned. Of all of the states that don't or that offer earned time credit, Ohio was the lowest at 8%. So we wanted to move it to the average, which is 25%. We did have to eliminate, though, the ability for murderers, rapists, and child molesters to receive this time off. It just was too hard of an issue to put before the voters without doing a tremendous amount of education about, how everyone really needs to do rehabilitative work while they're in prison. This doesn't prohibit those folks from getting rehabilitative work. It just prohibits them from getting out early as a result of doing the work. The second thing that we do is we're trying to change felony 4 and felony 5 simple drug possession. So that means that's the lowest level drug possession that you can have as a 4 and a 5 felony. What we're trying to do is move that down to a misdemeanor. It still means that it's illegal to have drugs. So a misdemeanor carries the charge of up to 180 days in jail. You could be sentenced to treatment at a community-based correctional facility. You could be put on probation. There's a whole myriad of things that they could do. Changing this classification allows those folks to not have that felony, and it also allows them to receive treatment that they normally wouldn't receive while they're incarcerated. So that's the second thing. The third thing is probation violations. Like Wendy was talking about, what we had seen was probation violations were making up 23% of all of the people who are being incarcerated. So what we want is for probation violations to be seen as graduated responses. So if you miss an appointment, if you don't get the landline at your house because you're incarcerated inside your house or whatever, if you miss any of these, this is all technical, right? We don't want you to be sent back to prison. We want them to take a look at doing all kinds of other things, like sending them for the weekend to jail, or sending them into an incarcerated setting like a community-based correctional facility, doing different things that are more of, not so much of a hammer, but a corrective action. When what we are finding is that these folks who do violations when they would go to prison for even, more than a month, which obviously these folks were going for a full year, it completely changed they lost their job, they'd lose their housing, they'd lose their cars, etc., and it wreaked havoc among the families. So this way is another way to still punish them, but to punish them in a more careful, meaningful way that gives a little bit more accountability and also allows them access to treatment. And then the fourth thing is that these 3 things that I mentioned are going to safely decrease the prison population. And I just want to make sure everyone knows we are at over 49,000 incarcerated individuals in the state of Ohio. We have seen okay, wait, sorry. I'll answer this question as soon as I get done with this, but someone had just posed a question to me, so hold on one second. The reinvestment dollars, 70% of all the dollars that are saved would go to the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services for substance abuse treatment services. Now, these treatment services could be housing, if that's what you need inside your area. It could be for the police, like police or sheriffs or any law enforcement. If your sheriff in your county is doing a Vivitrol program, they could do Vivitrol. All these kinds of things would qualify for it. And it would be dollars that would go directly to the local level. There would be no state entity that would get this funding. So it would take it out of the prisons of like what you would save and then send 70% of it to the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. Then 15% would go to the Ohio Attorney General's office for victims of crime, for trauma recovery services. And then the last 15% is saved for paying for any kind of the changes, like moves from the from one court system to the other, because you would go from common pleas, the felony 4, felony 5s would go over to the muni courts. This in no way hinders courts from doing drug courts. This is actually giving them funding for drug courts. There's been a misnomer out there that that we wouldn't be able to have drug courts. That's completely not true. Another misnomer I wanted to qualify is that some of the opponents to issue 1 talk about 20 grams of fentanyl and how you would not, you would get a slap on the wrist for fentanyl for this 20 grams that could kill 10,000 people. I just want to make sure everyone knows that that is trafficking, and trafficking does not, we don't have nothing inside our the language that says anything about trafficking. Okay, thank you for moving that. But someone else wrote, I focus on reinvestment. Does Ohio participate in the Justice Reinvestment Initiative? If so, what has the data been about prison population reduction and the use of JRI funds to date? Hey, Wendy, can you help me with this? Because is the Justice Reinvestment, is that the CGA or the funds, I think?
I don't see where the question is.
Oh, it says Zoom group chat, and it was at the bottom when you hit it. And so it says, does Ohio participate in the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, which I think is the CSG thing, or the Council of State Governments thing?
Yeah, we do.
And we do.
It had been about prison population to reduce in there. Honestly, I don't have that information right in front of me, so I don't want to just speak off of the cuff, but I believe that we do participate in that and that it has been effective. We have the Council of State Governments has come in and done a number of projects here in Ohio, and part of that I think is taking dollars and moving them into the community for other types of programming. But what we can do is if there's questions like this, we can also try to get some research and send that out and maybe send information out over email if it's not something that we can just answer off.
Yeah, and I also have a chart that shows like all of the changes that we've done to the incarceration system to move it to decrease the population. It has just kind of hovered around anywhere between 45 and over 50,000 for the last 8 years. And nothing has significantly decreased this population. The population that we have right now in the incarceration system, 1 in 8 is just a felony 4, felony 5. The bigger changes so that's not going to be huge. It's like 2,600 people who are there for drugs. What you'll see though is the biggest change will be not letting the technical violators for probation and earning your time off. That's going to cause a bigger reduction in the population. The earning your time, they both will just kind of, it'll be slow, but it'll be faster than what we have seen it through any of these other avenues. Let's see. Convert those. Oh, okay. Yes, I meant to mention this to you, this first point. Those folks who are carrying around old felony 4, felony 5 drug possessions, specifically from the crack cocaine epidemic, would have the opportunity to go before a judge and ask to have their felony moved down to a misdemeanor. If that would allow them to remove a felony. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with all of the sanctions in Ohio regarding felony 4, felony 5. You know, if you have a felony 4 of any kind, you can't be a licensed barber in the state of Ohio. If you're a felony of any kind, you're not allowed to adopt. You're also not allowed to foster or be in a home of a foster or an adoptee. So this would allow a lot of people to come back into our society with full citizenship. And let's see, the expansion of pretrial diversion treatment. Oh yeah. Okay, well, I think this is about, so one of the things that will happen in jail populations, we've seen jail populations decrease in other states, specifically in Oklahoma, who passed this almost identical legislation because of the pretrial diversion. What we see in Ohio is that the majority of people who are sitting in our jail, although our issue 1 doesn't address this, like 70% in Franklin County, it's something like 80% in most other counties in Ohio. The people who are sitting in jail are there for pretrial because they can't afford to pay the bond to get out. So they're there because of the fact that they don't have financial capability. Well, this will inadvertently not put people in pretrial to wait. They'll actually be able to be bonded at a lesser charge because it would be a misdemeanor charge. Okay, yeah, the amendment does go further than 66. So it does, is a nice complement to Senate Bill 66. But one of the things I just want to make sure I say is that if you're on probation and you create a new crime, you still get sentenced for that new crime. It's a totally fresh new charge. If it's a technical violation, those are what we're saying won't go. Okay, what's the next slide? Let's see.
Did that.
Okay, the drug crime laws in the nation. This is not true at all about this law. There's 15 other states who have misdemeanor laws for drug possession. I think that, so I don't even know why they say that, but if lenient means that we don't send drug users or people with addiction to prison, then maybe that's what they mean. But the whole point of this is that you're in the state of Ohio, law enforcement is definitely unified in saying that we cannot arrest our way out of this. It is just simply impossible to arrest our way out of a health crisis. And tie a judge hands for imposing needed punishment. Judges don't like for you to take away discretion, period, like any kind at all. So they still will have a myriad of things. If you get caught with a felony 4 even drug possession and you come in with that judge will still be allowed to do, they could send you for 6 months into jail. They could incarcerate you in a treatment center that is a community-based correctional facility. They could home confine you. They could put you on probation. There's a whole host of other things that they could do. So the only thing that's being taken away from them is that they would not be allowed to put those people in prison. So the prison thing is something that they feel is they need to be able to put people in prison. And drug distributors, I'll say it is very unfortunate that now, as of yesterday, I have seen, I'm sorry, close this door, and I'm sad to see that the drug cartel thing is being put out there. People are saying that the Mexican cartels are going to come to Ohio. Trafficking, again, we do not at all impose any changes to trafficking. That is trafficking for the day as long. So I think that's it. Because the next one's Wendy. Was I supposed to answer any questions or anything? Because I'm sure I might be drumming up some stuff.
Yeah, I think, Reba?
Yes.
I think it'd be fine if people want to do questions for her, and then I can do 5 minutes about Reagan Tokes and then questions then, because people might forget the things they want to ask, because mine will be technical in another way.
Okay. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question or type it to the side in the chat area, you can do that. Do we have any questions?
Dale here. In Michigan, they're fighting right now for to reinstitute what they call good time. That is time off for good behavior. How does this earned credit compare to good time earned in the Ohio state prison system?
It's the same thing. That's exactly what, that's it. That is why correctional officers had signed our petitions when we were going around the state of Ohio. The correctional officers always felt like this earned time was a way to keep people in check, so like if you were bad behaved and, you just weren't following the rules, it was something that they could use as a chit to say, hey, you can't go to your classes if you're, not following the rules. And they also think that it would cut down on a lot of the violence. So.
Right. Well, Michigan is one of only 3 states in the country that has no good time allowances at all. So I'd love to see this bill in Michigan.
Yeah.
How is it doing so far? Is it coming up for a plenary vote in the November election?
So you will see it on the ballot. It'll be the only statewide issue on the ballot. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now is that the gubernatorial candidates are now using it as a political football. So yesterday, Mike DeWine came out against it, saying that this would be a roadway for the Mexican cartel. Which is unfortunate. We thought that it would get to this point, but I'm just a little shocked because we negotiated for over a year to get his endorsement. So, there's a little bit of politics that goes on with this, and that's just we expected it.
So the quote unquote tough on crime people are using it as a football.
Yes, and that's exactly what they said that they were going to do, is to make it a tough on crime that we are, and it does. So yeah, it's just I guess it is what it is. So they call it a Willie Horton move.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, Amanda. What do they call it? This is Pastor Vaughn.
Hi, Pastor Vaughn. Hi. Pastor Vaughn Cook.
Hey.
It's Willie Horton. It's from during the Reagan Dukakis, like when Dukakis had let someone out on probation, and that person killed someone. They let them out on parole, because this also doesn't impact parole, by the way. This is only probation, but. And then they ran that's how they defeated Dukakis in the presidential, is by running it over and over and over again, saying he was not tough on crime. And that was sort of the first move to the whole, this is when the crack cocaine epidemic was, starting. And so they were like, no, we need to do mandatory sentencing. We need to do, all these other things. So they're going back to that old playbook, unfortunately.
Well, the reason why I ask is it has been said, and perhaps even we even have evidence that the Mexican cartel have already been here in the city of Columbus, particularly the east side of Columbus. And so when you said that, there is some validity.
Well, they're still going to be here. I mean, but the thing is that the Mexican cartel, they get caught up in trafficking. Like when you actually have, and we're not touching trafficking at all. This right. Whole intention was just for people who get caught with possession, at low level possession at that. So if you get caught with any of the, a drug on you, and it is a personal use level, then you're a user. You're not, you're most likely an addict. And those are the people who we're trying to scoop up and move over.
And thank you. That's the rebuttal that we used this summer in this appeal for signatures. So, but thank you, Amanda.
Thanks.
Okay, how about we move on to Reagan Tokes, and then that will give us a few minutes for other questions at the end.
Great. Willie Horton. So Reagan Tokes is a bill that is created as a response to a horrible crime, a person who came out of prison and killed a young girl by OSU. And so this is a bill that has had a lot of attention, and this is not a ballot initiative. This is a piece of legislation that has been moving through our state house. And I am not going to, it's a lot to get into because it has a lot of different provisions, and there's 2 different bills. And so I'm going to do my best to try to summarize sort of the overarching point and some concerns that that we have, because what we think is that this bill may have momentum to get through the legislature, or at least portions of this bill. And if that happens, it would produce a very significant change in how our criminal justice system functions for violent offenders, for people who have committed more serious crime. Senate bill, the numbers of the bill are listed there. House Bill 365 is passed through the House, and Senate Bill 201 has passed through the Senate. And so there still is a process that needs to take place, but when you go into lame duck, so after our election, they could tack portions of this bill onto other pieces of legislation and just pass it. So we're not entirely sure exactly what the process will look like, but it's just something that we want people to pay attention to. And if folks have concerns about it, to raise that with their elected officials. So here's just a quick overview of what this bill does. There's a sentencing component to the Reagan-Tokes law, which is in both House Bill 365 and Senate Bill 201. Senate Bill 201 is just the sentencing portion. And what it would do is take a violent crime for felonies 1, 2, and certain felony 3s and move them to indefinite sentencing, which means you'll have a minimum prison term and a maximum prison term, which is something we used to have in Ohio, and we had changed to just have one out date, but now they want to move back to this indefinite sentencing, which creates a big fluctuation in how long people may be in prison. And they want the purpose of all of that was because if a person is really doing wrong and causing problems in prison, the reason why they wanted to do this was to be able to hold that person a little bit longer. So we can talk about the carrot and the stick. The idea was to have a stick that you could threaten a person with longer prison time. And the idea is that would help modify behavior or whatever. And then you would have the carrot on the other end if a person was doing exceptional behavior, that they could qualify for an additional, like an early release or a presumptive release on their minimum sentence. But in the course of this bill, some changes have been made that are kind of nuanced, but that people who have been studying this are raising a lot of concerns that the ability to lengthen a person's sentence or to prevent them from getting that presumptive release on their minimum or the early release, that process to get out early, which would kind of counterbalance the numbers of people who might be held longer, has been greatly reduced. And the concern is that that early release is going to happen very infrequently, because it would require that the early release has to go back before a sentencing judge, and is almost like retrying the case, kind of the way they do in the parole board. And very few people get released that way. And so what that means is that if we change the sentencing structure, then the way that this bill is written, that more people would be held longer, and there wouldn't be a viable counterbalance of early release for that category for positive behavior, and therefore our prison system would grow pretty significantly. More than any of the other bills we've seen, it would be a pretty significant thing. So we are concerned of the ramifications of that, and are trying to raise awareness about this because I'm going to try to see where we have the slides. I'm trying to pull my notes up. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to give you some data. So impacts of Reagan Tokes, which has not yet been passed into law, but the figures are that we believe the prison population could raise between around 1,700 more people annually, and that the cost of incarceration for keeping those people longer would be $44 million. There's also provisions in Reagan Tokes that are different than just the sentencing part. So the House version, 365, has the sentencing changes, but it also has a whole bunch of other things about expanding parole officers so that their caseloads would be smaller. So they need to hire more people. And they want to also mandate that there's housing available for people, which is a great thing. If they have a really violent crime and they want to go to they want to send that person to a halfway house, it's very difficult for certain people to get accepted and admitted into some of those programs in Ohio. And so there's this gap. And so that's one of the provisions in 365, which is a really good thing. However, there's no funding within this bill. And so if we made those changes, the concern is we would expand dollars that perhaps have to build 2 more prisons under 201 or up to 4 more prisons under 365. And we would have to allocate dollars from our current budget, from something that's there, to parole and to housing, which are laudable goals, but would probably be we believe would have to divert funding from where they currently are being used for rehabilitation services, for other types of programs inside the prison and outside the prison, where DRC has made attempts to do these types of interventions, and that people would probably have less access to rehabilitation programs, less access to early release under this bill, and more threats to stay longer. And so it could really shift what is available to people with violent crime. Then we talk about hope inside of the prison. If there's not a viable option for people to get into programs or to widen the type of rehabilitation that we offer, because we're mainly looking at lengthening sentences as the primary response to treating bad behavior, then that calls into it's a philosophical like where you're putting your solution is really much more on the just keeping people in prison longer and not looking at what we're actually doing with them while they're in prison, because a lot of people who have felony 1s, 2s, and 3s are doing a long period of time in prison, and there's a lot of programs that are not available to a person until they're almost to their out date. And so people sit there for a very long period of time, having very limited access to program. And we believe if we changed the way that this law is, that could even make less access to programs. And so it seems like it's missing a lot of big things and could have a humongous impact on our budget in a way that doesn't seem to have been fully vetted and considered by our legislature. And so that's something that we wanted people to know here, because those of us that do work inside the prison, I know there's a lot of people that ask a lot about people who have done these more significant crimes, that have spent a lot of time in prison and have worked and are trying to change their life around, and what kind of hope might they have. And this is a bill that would directly impact that population of people that we want people to better understand, and our legislature to fully consider the ramifications. That's what I want to share. I don't know where we are.
Did you want to say anything about conversations or kind of the pros of it really fast, and then we'll wrap up?
Yeah, the pros of it are that the idea is that the indefinite sentencing is that it would positively give reward for good behavior, and it would give longer sentencing term for bad behavior. And so if that's meted out in a way that is accessible to people, then that may be a positive thing. But what the concerns are is that getting out early, and I have some fact sheets and things, so if people want more details about why this is a concern and kind of difficulties with that, is that a person could get a presumptive release, but the Department of Correction could rebut their presumptive release without any hearing at all, and they don't even get a lawyer to go before the judges as a requirement. And so there's a number of things with the process which makes that early release or that type of that counterbalance seem very, very minimal, based on the current statistics that we have of people going through sentencing court with early release. How infrequent that those are.
Okay. So, so this is, I'm just going to jump in for sake of time. This is some of the research that Wendy provides. And just so all the participants know, we will post this video or this webinar, and then we'll also provide you with a link to this PowerPoint. So don't feel like you have to scribble down all these notes and things. So this will all be accessible to you after we get done videoing and recording it. So let's just skip to reflection items, and then a couple minutes for questions because we're right at 1 o'clock.
Sure. So the reflection items, kind of going back to the earlier part about faith rooted advocacy and what do we bring into this space for either these issues of criminal justice reform or other things that we may be carrying in our hearts to make change. And I thought that these questions were important as we do the work for All in Community. What issues do the neighbors that you help, what are they carrying? What is the pain that they're carrying? Because you're invested in the lives of people who are involved in the justice system. And so part of it is us being aware and thinking about how the barriers that happen with the individuals that we may be caring about and their families, how does that affect the larger crowd, the larger community? Because that drives us into a question about systems and advocacy. And if we want to be involved in influencing or educating our legislators about the things that we may know or stories that we may have or meeting people that we're working with, we have to build relationships with our state representatives. And so that means doing some research, understanding more about who they are, and being active in reaching out and, holding meetings. And we'll talk about that later, but, that is a part of this process, obviously. And then the other thing is just the stories that we have. A lot of times when people advocate for change, especially, it's a lot of times it's data points and it's, and data is really important. Statistics and data and numbers are very important, but the stories and the human lives are what move and motivate most people. You have to have both things. And I think that we carry stories, and we have the ability to carry stories, bring people who have their own stories to share, weigh in about these larger conversations in our state about what helping people with drug addiction or people who've committed violent crime. How should we move forward as a state? These are really important questions, and the people who are most directly impacted are often not represented at the table where decisions are being made. And so I think we have a unique opportunity to help bridge that gap.
With some action items.
Yeah, action items. Amanda Hoyt, she has listed the link for information from their campaign about issue 1. And then I'm also working with a network of folks how to help rehabilitate and restore folks who've also committed violent crime. And so we have a letter that we're going to be circulating, raising some of the concerns that I have named here about fiscal impact and just sort of rehabilitation access. So there'll be a letter that we will send out. We're getting close to completing it, so it's not yet. You won't find it anywhere yet, but I'll share it with Reba when the time is right, and people will have an opportunity to look at that and consider if you would feel interested in adding your name to the points that we're making there in that letter as a actionable item for advocating. And if anybody has questions about writing jokes, I don't know if we have any time.
Yeah.
I don't see any written in the comments section, but I'm also available by email or by phone. Oh, there's the email. There you go. If people have questions, I'm happy to try to answer them the best that I can.